So menopause, it isn't something that we talk about, is it, as women? I'm so happy to have Gennev, our sponsor for tonight, join us, because they are going to change the face of this conversation, because exactly 100% of women are going to go through menopause. Thank you so much to Gennev and the entire Gennev team for joining us tonight and being our sponsor. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Joni. And thank you, Joni and Monica, for having us. Were you ready to transition, or did you have
No, just
okay,
no, not quite yet. I have a little story to say. So I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story about my hot flashes. And hold on one second. I've had quite the journey with hot flashes, and they just come at the darndest time. I don't know if anybody else can relate to that, but earlier this year, I was having a business meeting, and I was with a bunch of men, and I'm like, oh my God, not now, please, not now. And all of a sudden, within minutes, I had beads of sweat just dripping down my face. And as discreet as I could be, I was like, just trying to wipe those little sweat beads away. Have any of you guys ever had that thing happen to you? And then I have night sweats too. And so all night it's sheets on, sheets off, sheets on, sheets off. And in the morning I wake up and all of the covers are on my partner. Oh my gosh, it's such a journey. And then there's sex. Can we just talk about that for a minute? Just things just aren't the same as they used to be, but there's so much help available. But I didn't know like what to ask or who to ask at that point when I started going through menopause. And I didn't know whether to take regular hormones, bioidentical hormones, what else could I do to help with, sex. And so I'm so glad that you'll be hearing more about that tonight. And then there's the losses, the loss of hair, the loss of waistline, the loss of memory, and the loss of so many other things. Menopause really does a lot of things to women, and that's why we're here tonight. It's certainly a journey in this menopause chapter, isn't it? So I recently read a Brené Brown essay about midlife, and she says that her idea about midlife is that it's not a crisis, it's actually an unraveling. And her quote is, let me just read this, midlife is when the universe pulls you close, holds you tight, and then whispers in your ear, I'm not screwing around. It's time for you to get closer to who you are. So I'd like to think of midlife as a rebirth, getting closer to our passion, our purpose, and place in the world. In other words, remembering why we're here. I spent my whole life, my career life, as an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, trying to be the best business leader that I could be, the best friend I could be, the best daughter that I could be, and the best caregiver. And during that time, I really lost myself because I was taking care of everyone else. I thought, where am I? Who am I? Who am that? Oh my goodness, who am the person that I want to be? And I just kept thinking about that passion and that purpose. But it really did get lost in life, in that journey of taking care of others, the business and the personal. But now at 56, I'm finally there. I've never felt closer to my power, my purpose, and place in the world than I do today. Because that unraveling, that rebirth begins about the same time that menopause does, and that's why we're here tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so excited to introduce Jill Angelo, co-founder and CEO of Gennev. And I have to tell you, her and her team are going to change the conversation about menopause, bring it to the forefront, and take it away, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Wow, what a story. And first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing so much about what you've gone through. I think that's the first of it, is that we've got to start the conversation, and it's being able to talk about it normally. And you did that in such like a graceful and positive and uplifting way. I can't, you know, I'm like, this unraveling into who I truly am is actually something I'm looking forward to. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Jill.
Well, thank you for having us. We're incredibly excited to partner with RevelEleven on this very special event. I'm Jill Angelo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gennev. I started the company back in 2016 with the mission to help women take control of their health in the second half of life, starting with menopause. So it really starts with menopause. It is a transition that we go through in in the second half of life, and it's really something that prepares us for a whole nother half, and that's why we think it's so incredibly important. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So Shannon, if I can just get permission to share my screen, I'm going to pull up some slides here in just a moment. There we go. And basically, we're going to take a little bit of a dive into what Gennev does, and then I'm going to introduce you to really the main spotlights of the evening. As I mentioned, Gennev's mission is to help women take control of their health in the second half of life, starting with menopause. And we really see ourselves as an online clinic for a better menopause. Throughout the course of the evening, you're gonna really experience 3 different kind of chapters to our time together. Number 1, we're gonna look at, you know, am I in menopause and what does it really mean? Dr. Rebecca Dunsmore-Sue, she's the Chief Medical Officer here at Gennev. She's also an OBGYN. And if any of you have been with Grapevine for a long time, you've seen her before on a panel. She's going to take us through this kind of intro to menopause and also really talk about the journey that she sees as she's worked with women in perimenopause and postmenopause. Then we're going to do a kind of an experiment. We're going to go into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes into small groups so that each of us can share a little bit, again, dealing with this transition into who we are in the second half of life. To Joni's point is about starting the conversation. And so we're going to use a little bit of time for each of you to share. It's going to be very quick, and then we're going to come back together as a large group and head into our second session, which is all about treatments and solutions. And this is a panel. Rebecca is going to join again, as well as Stacy Kazanchek, who's the Director of Health Coaching here at Gennev. She's also a registered dietitian. And Dr. Wendy Ellis, she's a naturopathic doctor based here in Seattle, who's worked a lot with us on supplements and herbal and more natural solutions for menopause solutions. The third topic is the one I think we'll all be waiting for, and it's about sex. It's a conversation on sex. And joining Rebecca will be Dr. Yashika Dooley. She's a urogynecologist. We're really excited. She's got some props she's going to take you through. And so we're going to end the evening talking about that question around sex and how much it changes and how we kind of can get back to having the kind of sex that we want, or even having better sex than we're having, or at least understanding that part of our bodies and ensuring that we feel our best. So with that, one last thing I'm going to mention, at the end of the night, we will leave time for Q&A. We certainly want to ensure that you all have time to ask questions. There's a lot during this transition, and we'll be offering some follow-up, but there will be Q&A during that time. So in addition, next I want to take you through just a brief headline around who Gennev is. I mentioned we're an online clinic. We really offer telehealth services, and women can get support for gynecology questions, primary care, as well as lifestyle management support. And that's through telehealth by appointment or by membership. You can work with our team of OBGYN physicians, naturopathic doctors, nurse practitioners, and health coaches who are also registered dietitians via telemedicine. So in this world of wanting to stay at home, Gennev is a platform that's really here for you. We understand menopause, and we're here again to answer your questions. So with that, we're dive into our first section, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Rebecca Dunsmore-Sue. Again, she is our Chief Medical Officer here at Gennev. She's an OBGYN. She's also an epidemiologist, so she loves to study data and research in health, specifically women's health, and she's also certified by the North American Menopause Society. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Rebecca Dunsmore-Sue. So Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and unshare your, or share your video. I'm going to stop sharing the slides until you cue me to share them again for any visual aids during your talk.
All right, can everybody hear me? Excellent. So thank you so much to RevelEleven for having us tonight. I, as you can imagine, love to talk about menopause. It's what I do. And as Jill just told you, I'm also a geek and I love data. So really, I joined Gennev because I found that they were trying to promote really good evidence-based and scientific information for women, but also trying to educate women about their bodies and this time in life. And I think that, as Jill said, we don't talk about this enough, and we need to be talking about it amongst ourselves, with our physicians, and not being embarrassed to ask questions about menopause, because it's something that we will all encounter and go through. In terms of what menopause is, technically, by definition, menopause is a point in time. It's the point where you hit 12 months without having had a period. But that's not really what menopause is for women. Menopause really is sort of a journey, a transition. It's a transitional time that can last 10 or 15 years for some women. And there are a lot of physical changes that go along. There are a lot of emotional changes. As we heard at the very beginning, there are a lot of social and psychological changes that happen to sort of help us to grow during this time. All of these things are entirely and 100% normal. It is a normal physiologic transition that women go through. There are lots of theories out there about why we do this and why this happens. My favorite is that women, as they reached later years of life, were so valuable in their knowledge base that we could no longer risk them in childbearing. So these mothers and grandmothers stopped bearing children so they could be a valuable source of the knowledge of the community moving forward. That's my favorite. We have absolutely no way to know why we go through menopause. We just know that very few species do. It's us, a few great whales, and 1 or 2 great apes. So there you go. At Gennev, when we talk about the transition of menopause, we break it out into types. We do that just to help people sort of frame where they are in that process. Obviously, these types run together, they overlap, that's how it works. Nothing in medicine or your body is so simple and well defined as you are type 1 and then you will be type 2. But it just gives us a framework to speak about where people are in the transition. And so I'm going to go through the types a little bit really quickly. I think Shannon has, or Jill has a slide to pop up for everybody for this. So I'm going to ask them to put that up. Oh, I see it coming up right there. So in terms of types, and what you see on the graphic is there are a bunch of yellow bars. Those relate to symptoms that you might start to sense during menopause. The years start at the bottom and go to the top. And then you see sort of 5 types in there. The first type we put in there is really premenopausal. You know, a lot of women start to have symptoms when they're really what we would consider medically premenopausal. So in their late 30s, or even to their early 40s. And this is before you sense any changes necessarily in your periods. You can still get pregnant, but maybe mood symptoms start to appear, or your PMS starts to get more severe every month. It can be subtle changes that happens during this time. And for some women, less subtle changes happen during this time. Type 2, where a lot of women come to see their OBGYNs because symptoms get really bad, is perimenopause. And perimenopause is a time when you're starting to see some irregularities in your periods. Say they might get a little more irregular, they might get a little closer first and they get spaced apart. They might get heavier. You might skip one occasionally and then have a really heavy bleed at the end. But that's not really why women come to see us. What happens in perimenopause is the hormones are fluctuating pretty significantly. They can be vastly different month to month, which means how you feel month to month can feel really different. Some months you may feel great and on top of everything, and some months you may be in the pits. the most common complaints I get from women during this perimenopausal time are mood related. I also see a lot, this is where we start to see some of the weight changes that come with menopause, which nobody appreciates. And that typically is either a gaining of weight or a shifting of weight to somewhere around your middle. And as you can imagine, everybody loves that part. We can start to see some hot flashes during this time, especially as you get further into perimenopause. And a lot of women will actually talk about even joint pains during this time as a common symptom. And then sleep disturbances can start here, partly because of the night sweats and hot flashes, and partly just some level of insomnia can appear. What we define as type 3 is sort of that menopausal transition time. So the first sort of 3 to 5 years of menopause. And the reason we break out the different parts of menopause is because you see different symptoms and issues appearing in the different times. In the early part of menopause, you're still dealing with hot flashes and night sweats and sleep disturbances and some of the mood disorders, although those start to get better. And then as you get further along, some of the things that come up are vaginal symptoms and pelvic floor issues and some of those symptoms that have more to do with a long-term loss of the estrogen to the body. Type 4, as we define it, is sort of very postmenopausal. So, 5, 10, 15 years out. And that's really at Gennev where we start to focus on, okay, what are you doing to maintain your health for your life? And granted, at Gennev, our goal is to start talking about that premenopausally and through the perimenopause and all these stages. But really the focus in that postmenopausal time is cardiovascular health and bone health. And are you doing appropriate health screenings to keep you healthy and alive? Because we've got 40 years, 50 years to live in menopause, so we might as well live well during that time. And the best way to do that is keep yourself healthy rather than try to fight back from a place of ill health. You'll see on this graphic something called type 5. And type 5 is a tough one. It's sort of a catch-all, difficult place where we stick people who we can't really tell where you might be in that transition. And usually that's because people have had a hysterectomy or an ablation, and they still have their ovaries, so they're going to transition through a natural menopause because of their ovaries, but we just don't have that bleeding cue, although we can sort of suss out where you might be given your symptoms. Sometimes it's because you're on hormone therapy. You either have an IUD in your uterus, so we can't tell by a bleeding cue, or you're on birth control pills to help you transition. And so really, it's harder to sort of tell where you are at that point. I always like to plug in a quick word on hormone testing at this point. I don't typically do it. There are very rare occasions where it might make sense to do it, but it's not really predictive, especially in perimenopause and early menopause. Those hormone tests can be all over the place. They change week to week. And so really taking a point in time doesn't tell us anything. When I encounter a woman who's transitioning through menopause, what I'm looking to find out is what's bothering her, what symptoms do we need to deal with, and how do we make her life better? It doesn't actually matter to me what that little number value on a hormone test is. So I think that's about all I wanted to say of sort of what is menopause. So I'm going to throw it back to Jill here, and she's going to help lead us out into breakout rooms to talk a little bit about our own menopause experience, and then we'll come back together.
All right, great. Thank you, Rebecca. As Rebecca mentioned, we're going to break into breakout rooms, and what's going to happen is you're not going to have to touch anything other than to reshare your video and unmute your mic after you arrive in the room. So a few things. Number one, we're going to break out for about 5 minutes, okay? And you randomly are going to be moved into a breakout room. And basically what it is it's a Zoom with a fewer amount of people. Your screen will go dark for a moment. You'll reappear in a room and you'll see a few different bubbles of people. At that point in time, please share your camera, unmute your mic. And I'm going to ask each of you to take about 90 seconds or so, introduce yourself. So this is an opportunity for us to meet one another. And then also just share, one or two, things about menopause that you're dealing with, whether it's thinning hair or weight gain or I no longer have my period anymore and I'm like totally celebrating. Or use that moment to ask a question. You know, what do you use for hot flashes? I'm like really struggling with it. So use that opportunity either as a moment to share and or get advice. And the real goal of this breakout is to just start the conversation. Too many of us suffer in silence. And a big part of changing the way women manage their health in menopause is actually having a dialogue. And so that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to ask Shannon to go ahead and flip the switch so that we do move into breakouts. So if you just all kind of hang tight, you're going to reappear in a room. And once you're there, we'll bring you back to this main room after about 5 minutes. About 30 seconds prior to that, you'll see a window that pops up that says, you're going to be joining the big session again in about 30 seconds. Just allow it to happen. You'll come back naturally, and then we'll reconvene here. So Shannon, go ahead and hit join on your screen, and we'll see you in 5.
Mine did that too. Can I hear you? Aren't you on mute?
Hi, this is Shannon. Can you guys see or hear me? I'm trying to unmute everyone if you want to be able to have a conversation. Some people, according to the kind of the way that you come into the meeting, it doesn't allow you to go into the meeting rooms. It depends on your operating system. This is really complicated. Ayana, you're the only one I can hear, I think. And I don't see anyone.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're all coming back in. I'll just pause here for 1 second. Awesome, great. Well, isn't that kind of cool? It's kind of magical to just be moved to one place and back again. I'm going to, let's take a few minutes, and I want people to share. So I was in a group, I'll share first. And, you know, I think we all shared kind of symptoms that we're going through. People were graciously shared their age, and also some solutions of what they're using. And it sounded like sleep was probably the top reported symptom or challenge in my group that I was in. So I'm going to pick on someone to share as well. And I'll start with one of our presenters, Stacy Kazanchek. Can you turn on your camera and unmute and share a little bit about what you talked about in your group?
Yes, excellent. I had two wonderful women in my group. It was wonderful to get to know them and hear their journeys. And one shared that her journey or the symptoms during perimenopause were more related to mood, and found relief by going to or helping with managing the mood symptoms, going to her doctor and getting a prescription to help with this. And it worked wonders, and she said she feels so much better. And so hearing that there is options, you don't have to, as you talked about, suffer in silence. There is things out there. And then another woman in our group brought up a couple different things, that she's there more to gain knowledge and really values the conversations around menopause. She's still menstruating regularly, but knows that her mom went through menopause around the age that she is now. So she has some questions and more in preparation. And her sister, who is partnered with another woman, we're talking about, they're both going through it together. And so they are, they're interested in learning as well, and just how valuable it is to have information beforehand, how powerful knowledge is around menopause and this transition and part of life at this time.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Stacy. Next person I'm going to pick on is Monica. Monica, do you want to share what your group talked about?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So our group, there was a range of stages of menopause, from 2 to 4 or 2 to 3. And I would say 2 of us have been having insomnia issues. That is by far my biggest issue. And it's also interesting because we had 1 hysterectomy. And so it's interesting to see the different symptoms from in the midst of hot flashes. Sex drive changes was also fairly consistent, dryness, and questions about bioidenticals and if they're safe. I have the question about testosterone. I just added a little testosterone to my bioidentical, and I'm really curious if that's safe. So that was about it for our group.
That's great. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Let's have one more person share, 1 or 2, and then we'll pop it back to Rebecca. Yashika, do you want to share what your group talked about? Can you make your camera come live and unmute?
Yeah. So we had one woman who actually shared that she went through menopause very early in life and felt very isolated and alone because none of her friends were going through similar symptoms, and really felt like she didn't know what to do or how to move forward. And I can only imagine how difficult that was. And then the other woman in our group actually is on low dose birth control pills, and so still has symptoms of some of the hot flashes and stuff, but is of course not having any of the bleeding symptoms, but is pretty sure she's going through the change. So that was interesting to see, like, the wide range.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go with one more. I think we have time for one more. Wendy Norman. Let's get a non-presenter if you're still live. Wendy, are you still there?
Hello there.
Hello.
I am. Yeah, so we, am I there?
You are, yes.
Okay, sorry. So we had one with a hysterectomy, someone who's kind of testing around with biomedicals as well, and sort of looking at what that is, someone who's on birth control and still kind of starting to have symptoms, menopausal symptoms, and looking at what does that mean and should there be a shift there. And then someone who's just sort of entering with the night sweats, and we talked about I think it's called the chili pad, which I learned about. I did not know about that, so that was fantastic to learn about. And then I talked about the fact that for me, my biggest symptom was migraines, and that was how I knew it was starting for me, and just going on hormone replacement therapy, and then realizing that that was sort of the way to stop those. So along with food, and we talked a lot about food and diet as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to pull you back up. And I think we're going to use the rest of your time to go through some questions. We've got some questions coming into chat. And I would also welcome people. We will be, if we don't get to all these questions now, we certainly will take them at the end. But I would also recommend people in the chat, if there are things like the chili pad that you've used that have helped, put them into chat. Like this is an opportunity to share and to learn. And I think one thing I took away from all those conversations is, you know what, everyone's kind of going through this and dealing with it in the way they best know how, and no one's alone in it. So that to me is part of starting the dialogue. Okay,
Hey.
Rebecca, so I'm going to fire away some.
I'm actually looking at some of them, and
Okay,
I thought
great.
one thing that would be really helpful for me to sort of go through are a couple really good definitions about, because people are curious about hormone and what all the different types of hormone are. And I think we hear all sorts of words out there in the world, and all sorts of people telling us all sorts of different things about what we should and shouldn't be doing and what's natural and what's not. So I just want to give you guys some definitions about hormone replacement. What are hormones? What are bioidentical? What does all that mean? So the hormones that go down as we go through menopause are estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is the hormone that helps us to build an egg every month. So it's the hormone that goes up in the first part of our menstrual cycle. And then progesterone is the hormone that goes up in the second part of our menstrual cycle to help us stabilize the lining of our uterus and then shed it if we don't get pregnant. So these are the two hormones we're most connected to as women throughout our menstrual cycle and our cycling years. They're the hormones that are in birth control. So estrogen and progesterone are run at an even state in birth control pills and in hormone replacement therapy. We've talked a little bit about testosterone. That's also a female hormone, although it's more associated with men. Women have low levels of testosterone all the time. One thing that I like to explain to people is that when you go through menopause, your ovaries stop making estrogen and progesterone to a large extent. There's a little bit that's made still from the adrenals and from your body fat, but your ovaries don't stop making testosterone. And I think that's a myth out there that testosterone goes away as well. We actually still make it. And so testosterone replacement is very controversial in the medical field because testosterone is an anabolic steroid. It is what bodybuilders use to bulk up, and it's a banned substance in sports because it has a lot of other effects besides just the ones that we're looking for in terms of libido. So that's sort of the three hormones we typically talk about. And some people also ask me a lot about DHEA, or I'm not going to go through the chemical name of that because I will get it wrong since I'm on the spot. That is a precursor hormone to all three of those things. So it can turn or convert into estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, because these are all steroid hormones that are based on similar structures. In terms of bioidentical versus not, this is a really fraught area. Bioidentical was a term made up to market to women. What they mean by it, or what we have now taken it to mean, is estrogen or estradiol and progesterone as the hormones that our body reads and what has been doing the things in our body through our menstrual time. That's supposed to distinguish it from things like Premarin or mare's urine conjugated estrogens, and progestins, which are molecules that look a lot like progesterone but are slightly different and behave slightly differently. So those are usually the progesterones in birth control pills. What bioidenticals are not is any more natural. Bioidenticals are synthetically made in a lab. They are synthetically made in a lab, whether you take them in a pill that's gotten from a pharmacy or you get them in a compounded form. The only difference between those two is that the pill from the pharmacy is FDA regulated, and I know exactly what dose you're getting. When you get something compounded, we have absolutely no control. Compounding pharmacists are great. They do their best, but when you grind something up and mix it into a new base, it is no longer evenly distributed, and so your dose is irregular. The other issue with that is a lot of these compounded hormones are given to women to put on their skin. Estrogen absorbs beautifully through the skin. Progesterone does not. It actually doesn't absorb hardly at all through the skin. It's far too large of a molecule. So there are a lot of dangers in using things that aren't given in an FDA controlled way. And that's sort of my base conversation I have with all my patients in terms of what these hormones are. In terms of natural versus not natural, well, that's a hard conversation to have. For women, these hormones are natural. It's what we've had our whole lives. And the transition through menopause is also a natural, normal change. But for some women, it is very symptomatic. And the reason to take hormone replacement therapy, for the most part, is to work on those symptoms. If those symptoms are such that they're impacting your life, then you should consider whether that is an option for you. There are great natural remedies. We're going to go through a whole bunch of that in the next segment. But it's just a decision between you and the person you're working with in terms of what makes the most sense for you. There's no one right answer for every woman. The right answer is different for every woman. And the one other thing I want to address, because I just saw something pop up into the chat, is the pellets, because people do those in most of the regions of the US. The pellets are a compounded product, and I personally do not recommend them. They can be quite dangerous, and actually the company that makes them had over 4,000 adverse events they did not report to the FDA, including endometrial cancers. So we will not talk about those as a solution because they are not FDA regulated, nor are they considered safe. They will make you feel great. They have a high dose of estrogen and testosterone in them, but the long-term downstream effects of those high doses are not safe. One of my favorite analogies I give to patients is that, you know, lots of things make you feel good. In all honesty, heroin would make you feel good, but it doesn't mean it's safe. We need to balance, you know, how do we make women feel their best with how can we do that in the safest manner possible? So that's a bit of a strong example, sorry. But I just wanted to put that out there. And I'm gonna throw it back to Jill because we're gonna move in to, I think, the next segment. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. So while we get going on that, Stacy and Wendy, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and bring your camera up, and I'm going to share a brief slide that just kind of goes into an introduction for them. While I bring that up, one, you know, as we go into this next section, I think we're going to address a lot of the questions that I saw coming up in the chat around when do I start taking HRT? You know, should I hold off? You know, Rebecca went into a little bit around bioidentical. I think there's a question around what is biomedical. It's kind of the same thing. But I think what's going to be amazing about this next section with Stacy, again, Director of Health Coaching at Gennev. She's also a registered dietitian and an exercise physiologist. She's our health coach. She works with a lot of our clients via our Health Fix membership. She's going to talk and can talk a lot about the lifestyle changes. A lot of women want to do this naturally, and those are the women that Stacy tends to work with who don't necessarily want to go more the medical route. Also, Dr. Wendy Ellis, she's a naturopathic doctor. Again, we're really delighted. Wendy recently joined us on Gennev as a telehealth practitioner, so we're delighted to have a naturopathic doctor on our team. And she also has private practice here in Seattle, so you can see her in person. She's also a formulator of, she knows the supplement and the herbal world and the whole naturopathic care world incredibly well. So she can talk a lot more to those natural and or, you know, remedies that women might want to take more from a supplement angle. So thrilled to have these three together. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And as you three go through, I'm going to kick it over to them to talk a little bit more about each of their areas and about topics that they want to address. But through this dialogue, as questions keep coming in, please keep asking them. We will weave them into the discussion. And again, if we don't get to them right within the next 15 to 20 minutes in this section, we will address them at the end of this evening because we are going to have a broader Q&A then. So with that, I will turn it over. I'm going to turn it to Stacy to kick off.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jill and RevelEleven for this opportunity. It was great to be able to participate in the breakout rooms. And I think the main thing here is we do need to create more conversation around these changes during menopause. Full disclaimer or disclosure, I am premenopausal. So the information that I have is all through learning about menopause, but working with the clients that I have and being a part of Gennev and this amazing team, I am more and more passionate about creating more discussion around menopause and helping all of the women that are going through this to be able to feel more empowered during this time of your life. You really should not suffer in silence, and you should have the tools and the resources to feel your best. So with that premise, I want to start off by mentioning a question that I probably get asked the most when I'm working with my clients, or situations that clients are uncomfortable typically come up around weight. And really what I hear from most of the women that I'm working with, when they have concerns around weight, it's that all of a sudden, it feels like overnight, they gained weight, or they're noticing more weight around their midsection, and everything that they've done previously in their life no longer works, and they don't understand. It's incredibly frustrating, and they feel uncomfortable in their body. So I want to talk about the weight piece, and then also please keep feeding the questions in. I did see some related to nutrition, and so we'll get to some of those things as well. But I would say when it comes to weight, there's no, again, one size fits all. And in working with the clients that I have, it's an approach that works best for them. A couple of things to think about or to be helpful to understand this process. Weight changes, and especially weight gain around the midsection, is a normal part of menopause, and it's related to a couple of different things. So as the body decreases estrogen, the body, because estrogen is so important for so many functions, I think many of you are realizing the role estrogen plays now as it's decreasing, and the body knows that as well. So the body tries to compensate, and it does this by increasing body fat mass, specifically around the abdomen, because fat tissue secretes estrogen. So this is actually protective. This is your body's way of saying, I'm trying to help out here. There's a loss of an important hormone, and I'm trying to compensate for that. And this is the way I know how to do it efficiently. So as frustrating as that can be for some women, know that there is a reason for that, and that is a part of related to the changes that are happening during menopause. The other piece that happens with aging, and this is actually for men and women, is our lean body mass decreases. And that's your muscle mass. And that muscle mass decrease results in a decrease of what's called our metabolic rate. So that calorie burn, that calorie expenditure starts to go down during this time of life, partly due to the fact that that there's less muscle mass. So these things I think are important to call out so that we know weight changes. It's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's because the body is in fact changing. And so body shape and size changes as well. I think when I'm talking to women about weight, it's also important to think about why do they want to lose weight? What is it about the weight loss? And so I encourage, if weight is something that is of concern for you, or a change in weight during perimenopause or menopause, asking yourself, why do I want to be at a different weight than I am now? A lot of things come up. This tends to be related to feeling better in their body, being able to move and do things that they used to. And by implementing a variety of different habits, so certainly diving into nutrition and exercise are components, but weight is complex. It's not just what you eat and moving more. There is a lot of factors involved in that. And so when I'm working with women around this, it's really thinking about what's realistic for you. What is your current nutrition looking like, and how can we make changes to that? Common things that can help and typically help women feel better as well would be increasing fiber-rich foods. So thinking about really colorful plates, lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains. These things, not only do they provide more fiber, which can help fill you up, help you feel more satisfied, they provide a lot of nutrients, and those nutrients can also provide energy as well. And sometimes just that lack of energy can make it hard to be moving. And we know that movement is a part of finding balance, whether it's with weight management or also feeling good in your body. On the movement side of things, there's also, we know that movement is beneficial. I think most of the women I work with, they know that that movement is important for their health. That's not a surprise to them, but figuring out what does that look like now, and it typically is going to look different during this time of your life than maybe it did 20 or even 10 years ago, and that's okay. What's most important is that you find a type of movement that you enjoy doing so that you can sustain that. So sometimes women said that I used to run all the time and that was something that I really enjoyed. And now I just don't feel like running, or it's harder on my joints. There's definitely other options, whether it be walking or hiking or biking. There's other things that can be helpful. Also on the exercise piece, weight-bearing exercise, resistance training, which can look different. There can be a lot of different forms of this depending on your current fitness level, what you have access to, but putting some type of stress with weight on your joints can help with that lean body mass that we talked about that naturally decreases with age, can help to maintain that and even build it. So you're keeping that metabolically active tissue alive. And then it can also help with bone health, which is another concern because that decrease in estrogen interferes with the bone building. That's really important for bone density so that your bones stay strong and healthy as you're moving. The other piece that the movement is going to help with is balance. And when it comes to bones, the concern, obviously you want to have strong bones and dense bones, but those bones typically break. The concern is with falls. So if you can participate in exercise that keeps you mobile and flexible and those joints and those tendons and muscles strong, that can also decrease the risk of falling. So that in turn is also protecting those bones. So a lot of factors there become related to nutrition and exercise. The other pieces that can play a role in weight are sleep, which we heard about tonight, that can be difficult during menopause, stress management, and right now especially stress levels are high due to menopause and a lot of things happening in the world that we're facing. So there's a lot of levels, and that elevated stress can also lead to weight gain or difficulty managing weight. So it's important to take that holistic approach and really look and pull it apart, and then think about what is realistic for your lifestyle. If coming into menopause, I have some women that say they want to be the same weight they were when they were 30, and the reality is that may not be possible. It doesn't mean that you can't lose weight. It doesn't mean that you can't feel healthy and strong in your body. But being realistic, our bodies are meant to change, and you're not 30 anymore. So I think it's important to look at who you are, and also remember that the number on the scale doesn't dictate who you are or who you can become. This is an opportunity to start a new beginning and certainly implement healthy behaviors that can support your health and a healthy body weight. But it may look different than it was before, and that's okay. It's a new part of the adventure. And that's what we're here to help and support you with, and find the ways that you can feel healthy in that. So that's my general approach to weight during menopause, and where I find the most success with women is finding that balance and really redefining what this is going to look like for them at this point in their life. And it's never perfect. There's times things come up and we have to work through that, but that's also part of the process. So Wendy, I wanted to, I know weight comes up for you in your work with your patients, so would love to get your input as well from the naturopathic side.
Yeah, absolutely. You covered almost all the things, which is great. But, you know, I'm 46 and I'm basically in this perimenopause place where I'm down to a one-day cycle. And so clearly my estrogen is falling and I'm experiencing the mood issues, but also this tendency towards weight gain around the middle. And I would say that personally, one of the best things for me and also patients is that if you've traditionally been a runner and you keep running and you're still noticing that weight gain, I'd say the biggest difference clinically for patients has been adding some sort of weight resistance, like Stacy mentioned. And so as you build more muscle with resistance training, that is going to have a higher basal metabolic rate. And so I feel like that's been really important for patients. And then the other thing is our protein intake should increase over time as well. And so, you know, the vegetables are really important, the fiber is important, the whole grains are important, but that protein is going to give you more energy per calorie. And so it's really important that you have good levels of proteins to sustain your blood sugar, because when the blood sugar falls and we become tired, the quickest way to actually improve your energy is usually to grab something quick. And I think that a lot of times menopause can take away that willpower, so to speak, and you just grab whatever's easiest, and it tends to be starchy, carby sort of things. And so if you have more sustained blood sugars, then you're going to have less tendency to reach for something that you don't necessarily want to eat. Stacy mentioned the sleep component, and if you're not sleeping because of hot flashes or night sweats, you're going to be tired during the day, and that's going to make you reach for snacks as well. And one other thing that's pretty important to know is that, as Stacy mentioned, as estrogen declines, our basal metabolic rate does decline as well as we lose that lean muscle mass. And we actually burn about 200 to 400 calories less per day. And so if you think about, 1,200 to 1,500 calories, of course, it depends on who you are. But if you track your meals ever, that could be an entire meal. And so it's really important at this stage in life to really take a look at, what are you eating? And that's when Stacy becomes really helpful, because there are a lot of diets out there that aren't healthy and not sustainable. And the last thing we want is to go on a diet that dumps a lot of weight, and then your body will just try to take you right back to that set point. And so losing weight in a slow, steady way is going to be sustainable. And then you really have to pick up your exercise to maintain that weight loss. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that piece. So they make all this effort to lose weight, and then it just comes right back. And so working with patients to figure out what's a realistic diet. And I think the Mediterranean diet is a really good example of a healthy, whole foods, sustainable diet. And that's healthy for cardiovascular disease, for bone density, for reducing Alzheimer's. It's just really important across the board. And one other thing is, when you do have that weight gain around the middle, I feel like it's really important to note how much that's associated with cardiovascular risk. And so once you start noticing that weight gain, it's really important to check in on your labs correlating with your heart disease risks, such as just a cholesterol panel. Yeah, I think that those are my additional points towards that weight loss. But like Stacy said, I think it's really important to recognize that it's an evolution and our bodies do change. And I was in a group recently with a woman who basically said, I feel most challenged by my weight when I'm thinking about what other people think of me. But when I'm feeling strong in myself, I really feel good and I feel healthy. And as long as I can do the things I do and sustain my healthy body weight, then she said, I just feel like if I'm happy with myself, then I'm less conflicted about what people think about me. And I thought that was a very valid point.
Yeah, I think that's important.
From both of you. That's, and this is one of the reasons I love working with Gennev, is because we have all this expertise in healthy living, basically, which is really the goal of everything we teach. I wanted to say, just put in a couple quick things. One, I know I saw a question go by about, well, is this abdominal weight helpful, or, why is this happening? I think, why it's happening is all the things that Stacy and Wendy have gone over. I like to tell women, if you think about it though, your body also has an impetus to put on a little bit of weight in menopause, because the one thing that we know is that fat makes estrogen. So by putting on just a little bit of weight, it's sort of supporting you and supporting your symptoms and supporting your bones through the menopausal transition. The other one I wanted to mention is about the cardiovascular risk with the abdominal weight. That's a really important point, because as we transition through the menopausal transition, our cholesterol profiles start to look more like those of men. And, we think of heart disease as a man's problem because they tend to start having issues with their hearts in their 40s. And that's because they don't have the level of estrogen we do in our 40s. But women start having problems with their cardiovascular system in their 50s and 60s because we lose that estrogenic protection. And so really thinking about our cardiovascular health is key, because the thing that kills the most women in this country is cardiovascular disease more than anything else.
I did see, thank you, Dr. Rebecca, about clarifying some of those things. And one question I did see as well related to intermittent fasting, and I do get this question a lot about whether intermittent fasting is healthy for someone to do during menopause. And it's interesting, there have been research that shows some benefits to intermittent fasting. What I want to point out is a lot of this research is done in men. May not be surprising to most people here, given that we have a lot of questions about menopause and we do need more research in this area. One thing to consider with the intermittent fasting is what it looks like. And that can look like very different things for people. There's all different versions of intermittent fasting, and some women do find benefit, and there can be benefit perhaps to a prolonged nightly fast. So if the majority of the fasting is happening at night, so maybe you have breakfast a little bit later in the morning, or that first meal later in the morning, there may be some benefits to that structure. But if you are fasting so long that either you're feeling really hungry, or you have a really small window of eating time, this can actually, for women, result in an increase in cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone that already does tend to increase during menopause. So you're adding an additional stress to that. So I think it's important to keep in mind what that intermittent fasting structure looks like for you, and working with someone like a registered dietitian or being supervised by a medical practitioner to know that you're not doing more harm than good. The other piece that sometimes the intermittent fasting structure, again, depending on what it is, does help people to provide that structure around eating. And I think it helps people to be more mindful in their choices. They're thinking about, am I hungry right now? What time is it? Or planning their meals so that they aren't having these, the majority of their calories at later night dinners, that they are spreading their meals throughout the day, or getting most of their calories in earlier in the day when you're up and about and moving, and actually using that calories for energy for things you do. So I guess it's mixed on the intermittent fasting, but again, it really depends on the structure, and there are some limitations in terms of specifically in women and women during menopause.
One question I want to pop up, this is Jill, and I'm going to direct it towards Wendy. Can you talk a little bit about energy in women? We hear that so often. We haven't had a question come up, but it really goes back to even nutrients. And I know I've learned a lot from you around the nutrients our bodies are able to absorb. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So energy comes in many different ways. So if we think about, the fact that in perimenopause and menopause, especially menopause, we're having a lot of hot flashes and night sweats, and we're not sleeping. And by not sleeping, we're actually increasing our cortisol values in the evening when they should be highest in the morning. And so sometimes people are experiencing very low energy as a result of not sleeping. But also, I feel like we make poor dietary choices when we're tired. And then also, leading up to menopause, a lot of women are on birth control pills for a period of time, or other medications like antidepressants. And some of the energy issues could be correlated with nutrient deficiencies secondary to the medications that we may be taking that are helpful for many things. And so I worked with Gennev to develop a supplement for women called Vitality, and it just came out, and this is the beautiful box. And Vitality was created mostly because women were just feeling tired. And so some of the main ingredients in Vitality really work to overcome some of those nutrient deficiencies that I see commonly in women. And so B vitamins, for example, B vitamins are really important in adrenal health. They're also important in our stress response, and they're really important in mood. And so I think that B vitamins are really important in peri and postmenopause to help us actually have more energy. And the other nutrients that are in this supplement are really focused around making us feel better. And CoQ10 is another nutrient that's in this supplement. And CoQ10, it's a nutrient that our mitochondria make, and it's kind of considered the powerhouse of the cell. And for example, if someone does develop cardiovascular disease and they're taking a statin or a blood pressure medication, which is increasingly common at this time, those medications, although super important, can deplete CoQ10, which can make people tired. And so that's another nutrient that's really important in this. And then if we have this fatigue secondary to joint pain, a lot of people just report that they just feel tired because they feel achy. And one of the most important nutrients that we've been using more readily is curcumin, which is a compound that's derived from the herb turmeric. And curcumin, especially when it's in its most potent form, is a really great anti-inflammatory, but it's also an antioxidant. And so antioxidants they come mostly from food. And if we think about brightly colored foods like red peppers, carrots, berries, these antioxidants are really important, not only for hot flashes, but also to give us the fiber, but also to give us more energy. And so the Vitality packets, they come in a package with 5, and it's interesting, Stacy and I both have been talking with patients, clients who have been taking it, and one of the most common things that we've heard is that when people open the package, they're like, wow, it has a really strong smell to it. And we also discussed if something has a strong smell to it, it generally means it's a good quality nutrient. And B vitamins have that very strong flavors and smell, and so does curcumin. But this supplement can be taken all at once, and we've tested it with a number of people. And although some people have titrated up and started with 1 with meals and then increased over time, the majority of people who take it just take it 1 time a day. And the other thing that's in here too, and there's a number of things, selenium's in there, which is a really important component of thyroid function. And so thyroid is another reason why people start feeling tired at this time. Hashimoto's hypothyroidism is a type of autoimmune thyroid that presents as low thyroid function. And so selenium is really important for thyroid function. And so if you're feeling fatigued, checking your thyroid at this point is really important. And also the other, sorry, I need to put my glasses on. That's another part of menopause, right? Is your vision changing. And actually estrogen can really play a role in not only your vision, but also your mucous membranes in your nose, and patients will start snoring at this time. It really plays a role in just the dryness of your body. So with my glasses on here, the other component in here that I wanted to talk about is the vitamin D. And vitamin D, there's a lot of deficiency in our climate here, and most of us are probably here in Washington. And we're at a latitude where we don't get a lot of vitamin D, even when the sun is out. I'll have people come in with brown skin and their vitamin D levels are very low. And having low vitamin D is not only detrimental to your bone density, but it also makes people feel tired if they have low vitamin D levels. And so I created Vitality mainly because people were feeling tired, and these were the nutrients that allowed people to feel better, but also considering some of the common health conditions that are associated with menopause. So hopefully that's
great.
Some questions about fatigue and vitality.
That's great, Wendy. Thank you. Well, we've got questions coming in. So again, we're going to leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. But thank you, ladies. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but time flies. And we've got about 20 minutes left of our time together this evening. And so I'm going to ask Dr. Yashika Dooley to join us and turn her camera on and unmute. And we're going to go into our conversation about sex and, just kind of vaginal health. Rebecca and Dr. Dooley are going to talk through this, but to start with, Dr. Dooley, can you just introduce yourself and your background, and how did you get to be where you're at?
Yes, so hello everyone. My name is Yashika Dooley, and I have always wanted to take care of women. I did an OBGYN residency actually through the military in Patterson, Ohio. And then after that, I did a fellowship at Loyola in Chicago. And then I am still active duty Air Force in the military. So I've been in San Antonio. I work with residents, and I work doing pelvic floor health and urinary and fecal incontinence, a little bit of prolapse, lots of pelvic pain. And the majority of my patients are perimenopausal, postmenopausal women. So that's kind of my bread and butter, and I just love taking care of them. So that's me.
Thanks so much, Ashika. I'm so thrilled that you could join us for this. And as anyone who knows me, and many of the people on this thing I think have seen me speak before, know that I love to talk about sex.
Yes.
It's what I do in clinic. And it's such a profoundly important part of a woman's life, whether or not she is partnered at any given time. Being able to feel sexual and use her body in a sexual way is an important thing. And there are so many aspects to sexuality in women, especially as we age. We are only going to just barely scratch the surface of this topic, and I think we can probably count on Doni and Monica to have a whole nother sex function down the line, hopefully. And one of the things we're not going to be able to talk about at great length is libido changes that come with menopause, because they do come with menopause. The reason we're going to sort of leave that one to the side is because that's its own 90-minute topic.
Yes.
Because libido in women is just so very complex. What I tend to deal with a lot in clinic, and I'm sure Dr. Dooley does too, are vaginal changes that come with menopause. And that's really the loss of estrogen and the way the actual tissue of the vagina changes. Yes. And it happens to every woman who goes through menopause and does not take a hormone replacement. However, it does not bother every woman who goes through menopause. And what studies tell us is 50% of women will have problems with their vaginal tissues once they go through menopause. The other 50% are fine. You know, those changes happen to everyone, but it doesn't necessarily cause problems. In my experience, I don't know about you, the things that women come to me for are either day-to-day dryness and discomfort or pain with intercourse.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And pain with intercourse is one that, we got to deal with the tissues, but we also have to deal with the pelvic floor. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have you here, because you are a pelvic floor expert. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the pelvic floor and how that can be involved in sexual function, but also sexual pain as we age.
Sure. So I actually brought a little model. So I think the model is helpful because we always talk about the pelvic floor and people are like, what do they mean by that? And so I think this really kind of gives you, the diagram for it all. So this is a pelvis of a woman kind of standing facing forward just like me. So pubic bone here in the front, and then her sacrum in the back, hip bones on the sides. And, when I turn it, this is the view like your doctor would have, okay? And so I think this is good because women need to know. They're always asking me, what are the holes and what are the parts? And so you're gonna have the clitoris up here, you have the urethra, the vaginal opening, and then you also have the anus back there. And so you can see here lots of muscles and lots of areas that come into play when you're looking at the pelvic floor. And the pelvis really is a bowl. So when I turn it this way, it's a bowl, and all of your the vagina and the uterus, the bladder all sits in this bowl. And if anything is going wrong with this bowl, then you can end up with a lot of issues. And oftentimes the bowl, those muscles can just get tight and spasm. One of the reasons can be if you've had, prior surgery. So if you had a vaginal delivery and maybe you had an episiotomy or any kind of trauma or damage within the vagina, you can also just have spasms in the muscles. And so it's kind of like how sometimes you wake up and you have like a little prick in your neck or, a back pain. You didn't do anything, but for whatever reason, the muscles are tight and spasmed. And for a lot of women, that also can happen. And when you have something like the uterus or the bladder sitting in that bowl, the muscles are now squeezing on all of those organs, and it causes a lot of irritation for everything in that bowl. And so you get that sense like, you feel like you got to go to the bathroom all the time, or the tissues are irritated, and it just makes it very difficult for women to want to have intercourse, to feel aroused or sexual, or even want to be touched, because it can be very tender just with the lack of estrogen in that area.
I totally agree. You know, what I tell women is when I do an exam for someone who's having pain with sex, the first thing I do is look at the tissues themselves. So I look at the vagina. I look for, is it tearing? Is it able to stretch? Is it able to do all those things? The easiest way to solve those issues is obviously vaginal estrogen. And I know a lot of women are really nervous about hormone replacement in general, but the beauty of vaginal estrogen replacement is that it's really a local treatment. So we're treating the tissues themselves, not treating you systemically. You won't get a systemic load of it. In fact, it's considered so safe that our national organization, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, has put out a position statement saying that it is safe to use even in women who've had a hormone sensitive cancer like breast cancer, because so little is absorbed, you're just not going to stimulate anything like that.
Absolutely.
So just treating those tissues, you know, have faith that you can make those tissues healthy and elastic and happy again. For women for whom that doesn't work or need other options, there are other things we can do as well. We can moisturize. There are other treatments that can be done. But basically, you know, if you are having issues with those tissues, please come see someone like Dr. Dooley or myself. We can help you with this.
Yes, and just know that using that estrogen is safe. I think, you know, there's nothing else that makes it feel better.
Yeah, talk a little bit about how you manage pelvic floor issues, because I think you just told us that we can have spasms, it can be, you know, you can have pain. Well, what do you do about that?
So really, if the muscles are spasming, if the muscles are tight, that is where the pelvic floor physical therapy or areas where you can allow those muscles to relax come in. And there's really not a lot of other ways to target those muscles in the same way. The way I explain it to women, because oftentimes they're like, physical therapy in my vagina, that doesn't make any sense. And oftentimes on exam, you can reproduce that pain. So I can touch and I can really, they're like, yes, that's exactly where the pain is. That's what I feel. And so the muscles are tight and they're spasm like this. And the first thing I tell women is stop doing Kegels, because oftentimes they're like, well, I'm doing more Kegels. And I'm like, that's me. Your muscles like this and now you're Kegeling and you're looking like this. And it makes it worse. And really, it's kind of like if you have a spasm in your neck. What you want to do is relax the muscle. We're doing the opposite of a Kegel. And the only way to really do that is to do pelvic floor physical therapy. And they will start off actually helping you to relax those muscles, to get those muscles to get out of tension. And then after we're able to get the muscles working correctly, if there's a problem, then we can talk about strengthening. But first, it's really relaxing the muscles.
Yeah, no, and it's so key. It's a very frightening thing for women to think about doing. In my experience, at least around here, all the physical therapists I work with who do this work with women are women. And, you know, they do a combination of manual therapy or manipulation. And a lot of them actually use biofeedback, where they can actually show you on an electrical chart, like what the spasm in your muscle, and teach you how to relax. It's really about taking control of your pelvic floor again, because so much of our pelvic floor stuff is involuntary and we have to make it voluntary.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk a lot about that mind-body connection, because sometimes, especially if you've been in pain, you kind of disconnect because you don't want to feel the pain. So that's a great way where that biofeedback comes in, because it gives you that visual connection of, oh, that's the muscle you want me to move. That's what I should be doing. And it helps to give you that cue if you're doing it right or not.
Yeah. And, you know, what I tell a lot of women is, you know, it may not sound like the pelvic floor is your thing. It may just be vaginal issues that are your thing. But when a woman has been in pain for a long time, the natural response is for her to go like this, so things can't get in there.
Yes.
So even though that may have not been the original insult or problem, it can happen to all of us. And it's something we definitely have to keep in our minds. And that's why seeing someone like yourself who has expertise in all this, or someone who does sexual medicine like me, we can help women to sort out all the different pieces that go into sexual function.
That's very true. And I like to tell women, you know, it's nothing that they did wrong, because most of them are like, what did I do wrong? Should I have done this instead? Or did I use the wrong thing? And I'm like, for 99% of the people, it had nothing to do with anything you did or didn't do. It's just the muscles.
And I do want to put in one small plug, is that for some women, some of this pelvic floor spasm, some of this pelvic pain can be related to prior sexual trauma. So please, please, please feel free to talk to your doctor, your gynecologist about those issues, because they do impact how you use your body and your pelvic floor. And like Dr. Dooley said, mind-body connection is a huge thing. Your mind can do a lot with your body to protect itself, even if it's not the most functional thing later in life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you one more question before I think we're getting close to the end of this thing where we have to do some Q&A.
Yeah.
But the other question I wanted to ask is, a lot of what you do, I know you're a urogynecologist, a lot of what you do is urinary incontinence and prolapse. How can those impact sexual function as women age?
I think the biggest thing that happens is there is a lot of discomfort. There is anytime if you're having incontinence, just the fact that you're leaking urine, you don't feel sexy. You don't feel like you want people on you. The smell, all of that really takes you out of the mood of wanting to have intercourse or being intimate. And then with prolapse, everything's kind of bulging. There's this constant heavy pressure sensation. And a lot of women just find that to be very just uncomfortable in general. And mentally, the idea of putting one more thing anywhere near their vagina when they have all this heavy pressure bulge sensation really does, again, affect just their mental ability. And women are very mental and visual as far as intercourse.
Yeah, no, very, very true. I would love to invite maybe Stacy to turn on her camera, and because I haven't been monitoring the chat, and I'm sure there are questions going by us. So I want to make sure we're addressing things that people want to hear about. So I'm not sure if there's anything that's popped up that you want us to address really quickly before we sort of move on. I was going to give just a 2-minute thing on libido and why we need a 90-minute session to talk about that.
Let's talk about libido, but I will invite all presenters. Wendy, please bring your camera back on again so we can have all of our practitioners live as we start into our Q&A. But leading into that, talk a little bit about libido.
That's great for Dr. Dooley. Before we leave this topic is UTIs in menopause. Why am I having more UTIs all of a sudden?
Actually, it's just the lack of estrogen. So estrogen is very protective for both the vaginal tissues and also helping to prevent urinary tract infections. And I saw somebody specifically asking about that. So for many women, having just a little bit of local estrogen in and around the urethra and in the vagina really does cure that. So especially if you've never had a history prior to menopause with recurrent infections. So.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the tissues themselves, but also just the local flora of your vagina is different in menopause than it is before. And a lot of that's estrogen based. The pH changes, the bacteria that live there change, and so all of that sort of contributes.
I wanted to put a plug in for the 2020 Menopause Guide on the Gennev website because there's so much information that we haven't been able to share that's in that guide, and we all participated in putting that guide together. And maybe someone can put a link to that in the chat. I can do that too. But we didn't really touch on hot flashes, and there are so many things that lifestyle can play a role in with hot flashes. Someone asked about alcohol and stress, and both of those things can absolutely make hot flashes worse. And sugar can as well. And so hot flashes, I have many people who have been post-menopause for years and on a very stable hormone regimen, and with all the stress we've been having this spring, now it's almost summer, they're calling and saying, I think my hormones need to change because all of a sudden I'm having hot flashes, and I don't know what it is. And postmenopausally, their hormones aren't changing, and so we always look to stress to figure out how can you better manage your stress. And so that's a really important part of hot flashes, is managing your stress.
That's great. Can one of you take a question a little bit about frozen shoulder? This is one of those random, menopause symptoms. Talk a little bit about that.
I can jump in there, even though I'm not an orthopedist. So my base knowledge of the actual function of frozen shoulder is limited. But we do see a lot of frozen shoulder in women going through menopause and who are menopausal. And to some extent, that's age and trauma related to age and overuse. But what I find, I see a huge upswing in it in the early days of menopause. And I think a lot of that has to do with what Stacy and Wendy were talking about in terms of loss of muscle mass. So the shoulder is so very dependent on a very fine balance of all the muscles in the rotator cuff. And if those muscles start to get out of whack, then you can cause pretty significant damage, which can lead to frozen shoulder. There's also joint issues that occur at the menopausal transition as well, which contribute to this. And so, you know, we sort of barrel on with our lives as we head into this time of life and are doing the exercises we've always done and don't change anything, and suddenly your body can't support that same level of activity, or something that would never have hurt you before suddenly causes an injury or damage. So it's not, you know, the estrogen didn't do it directly, but all those changes your body is going through can really contribute to it.
All right, let's take one final question, and I see it from Monica before I bring her back on. Please talk to us about sleep. You all have comments on that. So Wendy, kick us off on that topic.
Absolutely. So sleep is very multifaceted, of course, and if hot flashes are the biggest cause of sleep disturbance, then treating your hot flashes is the number one thing. We talk about cortisol, and cortisol should be high in the morning and then decline over the day. And there's a lot of women who have really high cortisol levels through this period of time, and so working to manage your stress. And that obviously is a very large question, and Stacy's really great at that. And so whether it's exercise, sometimes exercising too late at night will contribute to sleep disturbance. Also drinking alcohol in the evening can contribute to sleep disturbance. And as far as hormone replacement can be a really wonderful thing for sleep. And generally speaking, when we think about if it's just hot flashes, estrogen can really nip that in the bud. But if you have a uterus, you have to take estrogen and progesterone. And someone had asked about the different forms of taking estrogen. I tend to gravitate towards the patch. It's something that you put on, and I tend to not use as much oral estrogen. I feel like the patch works better, but if you can manage your hot flashes, you're managing your sleep. But oral progesterone can be really helpful for sleep. And I find a lot of women who haven't been told to take their progesterone at nighttime, and taking that at nighttime can be very helpful. And there are many over-the-counter sleep aids. We know some of them are detrimental to long-term cognitive function. And so if you're taking Benadryl every night for sleep, or you're taking benzodiazepines like Xanax, we know that those have long-term problems, but we also know that most sleep issues are behavioral. So if you've treated your hot flashes and night sweats and you're still having sleep issues, there's actually an app called CBT, like Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and then the letter I. And this is an app that really trains you to have better sleep habits. And so that's sort of my approach to initially looking at sleep issues. So I'd say getting exercise during the day, making sure you're not doing too much caffeine. We have different genetics relating to caffeine metabolism, but a lot of people say, I can't drink any caffeine after noon, otherwise I can't sleep. And so you really need to experiment with not taking alcohol at night or taking caffeine before noon. Of course, caffeine is something that we all rely on, but it could be absolutely impacting your sleep. And there is a sleep section in that 2020 Menopause Guide. And I keep bringing that up because it's 62 pages of beautiful information. And so a lot of the questions that you will have on behavioral sleep issues are in that, including the resources that I just mentioned.
Yeah, we basically wrote a book and gave it to you for free.
We'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email. There will be links to resources that everyone's talked about. We are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and start to transition out. So to our presenters, thank you. We just rammed through so much information, but Dr. Dooley, Dr. Dunsmore-Sue, Dr. Ellis, Stacy, we call our coach Stacy. There's so much more I think all of you could be saying on your topics, but we will make sure to get you the guide. if you want to talk to any one of these women, you can do so by coming to Gennev. We've got telehealth appointments. Dr. Dooley yet isn't a practitioner, but hopefully at some point we'll be able to get her on board. But she's obviously a resource for all of us. But Stacy, again, is managing our Health Fix program at Gennev, if you want to work with a coach. And then, of course, Dr. Ellis and Dr. Dunsmore-Sue are on telehealth. Just in closing, I'm going to ask